Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited to have Dr. Anish Ghodadra presenting today. He's going to be talking about that early on journey into 3D printing. So we're really going to focus on trainees today and how to leverage freeware to get the job done, to get the models that you need to your surgeons. Dr. Ghodadra is a fantastic advocate and well-known player in this field. He's the assistant professor of interventional radiology and the medical director of the 3D printing program, as well as an assistant professor of bioengineering at UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Before we dive in, though, I want to just remind everyone who we are, RSNA, the Radiological Society of North America. Our mission to promote excellence in patient care and healthcare delivery through education, research, and technologic innovation. And the 3D Special Interest Group. Exciting update for us is we have formerly known as the 3D Printing SIG. We are now the 3D SIG with an updated mission statement to also include immersive imaging in that field, which is a really great companion to 3D printing. And a lot of the things you're going to see from Dr. Ghodadra today can also be used in that immersive imaging space. If you're not already, please consider becoming a member of the 3D Special Interest Group. You can see below the QR code that you can click to join. Within the 3D SIG, we do have 4 subcommittees: an education committee, an appropriateness committee, a quality assurance committee, and an outreach committee. So it would be fantastic to have our members that have not already joined one of these committees think about doing so. And then finally, save the date. Make plans to join us in Chicago from December 1st through 5th this year as we explore how to intentionally and intelligently build the right connections between people and technology. That registration opens in July 17th. So thank you for joining us today. Without further ado, I would like to hand off the screen to Anish, Dr. Ghodadra, to take us through.
Righty. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here today. And thank you to Dr. Zerpli and Santiago for the opportunity to talk to you today. We'll kind of dive right into the first of the webinar series here. Leveraging freeware is kind of what I'll discuss. But first, I'll talk a little bit about UPMC Radiology. UPMC is the largest healthcare provider in Western PA. We have 5 core academic hospitals. We are actually a payer provider. We have our own insurance company. The radiology department is one of the largest in the country, over 200 faculty, over 75 trainees, and growing. And our program here covers not only the 5 core academic hospitals, but the 35, maybe 36 as of a couple weeks ago, hospitals scattered throughout Western PA. As everyone here likely knows, 3D printing is utilized at the point of care to create models mostly of patient anatomy and to create patient-specific surgical tools. And the idea behind the anatomic models is that we can provide these models as an instant intuitive tool for understanding complex anatomy, planning, or even rehearsing procedures ahead of time. The program at UPMC had very, very humble beginnings. I started the program back when I was a resident, believe it or not, in 2016. And got a small grant from our chairman for a couple $1,000, got a small grant for about $10,000 from the Beckwith Institute, which is a local nonprofit that funds innovation targeting kind of benchtop to bedside type of work. And our initial mission was to create low-cost, high-quality 3D printed models for planning and education. This is what we looked like when we first started. This is the control room of an unused research MRI machine in the kind of the bowels of the hospital. We started with Form 2 and an Ultimaker 3 and an overly eager resident, yours truly, and worked with freeware software and really focused on the anatomic models is what we started with. And fast forward a few years, we are now funded by UPMC proper to provide clinical 3D printed models to the entire system. So we do not charge departments, we do not charge patients, but the system understands the value that 3D printing brings and the fact that we do it at a relatively low cost, and therefore basically just provides us with a budget to provide these services throughout the system. And today we use materialized mimics in ProPlan for all of our model creation, NetFab for packing builds on some of our printers, and then SolidWorks for any computer-aided design for medical devices and widgets, which I'll get into. We have 3.4 full-time staff, 3 full-time engineers, and a little bit of my time. We produced over 2,000 clinical models. And as of this year, we're producing about 60 clinical models a month, and then a handful of research and education models and traditional devices scattered throughout. Our mission has evolved a little bit, but essentially remains the same. We want to leverage our experience and expertise in 3D printing, engineering, and medicine to drive innovation at the point of care and improve the delivery of that care in any way that we can. We are very excited in the last month to have opened up our new 3D printing facility, launched May 15th of last month. It's a 2,500 square foot space that was just built. In this space, we have 16 total 3D printers with 4 different technologies: SLA, MJF, PolyJet, and FDM. And I think one of the crowning jewels in our space, along with our hardware here, you can see our HP printer, our Stratasys and PolyJet machine. But our crowning jewel, I think, is the fact that we have 3 ISO 7 clean rooms. And so ISO 7 clean rooms are the types of clean rooms that a lot of medical devices are created in. And so these rooms have positive pressure, HEPA filtered air, 60 air changes an hour, non-porous surfaces, including ceiling tiles, and go through a rigorous maintenance and certification process to ensure that we're manufacturing devices that are clean and able to be sterilized in a way that is safe and effective. One of our clean rooms houses our biocompatible SLA printers, and we have 2 future clean rooms that we're hoping to house printers that let us do patient-specific implants and beyond. This is our team. We have myself as medical director, Elliot Hammersley is our lead biomedical engineer. He's been with us 4 years now. And then Sean Graves and Nick Torres joined us about 1.5 years ago. And they're the ones who make the magic happen day to day. As I said, the bulk of what people focus on with 3D printing is anatomic models. Having a physical model of anatomy in your hands lets you get this instant intuitive understanding that you just can't get with traditional 2D imaging or even 3D reconstructions on a screen. And the idea here is having that anatomy ahead of time lets you plan ahead of time, helps you even maybe perform some aspects of a surgery ahead of time, which I'll get into, and you can make surgery faster, better, cheaper. And that's the notion, that's the pitch we essentially made to our leadership to say, hey, we can improve OR time, we can make things safer, we can potentially reduce costs, and for a relatively nominal price per model. Here I am delivering our 1,000th clinical model. This is Albert Lin, one of our orthopedic surgeons who focuses in shoulder. And for the last several years, he will not do a revision total shoulder arthroplasty without one of our sterile models in hand. And so it's become almost standard of care for a lot of different surgeries. It's kind of par for the course. Surgical guides are another area that we focus on and are growing in. We create patient-specific surgical tools. Here's a set of tools for reconstruction of an ear in microtia. We do virtual surgical planning and create surgical guides for maxillofacial reconstruction. And we also do a fair bit of what we call anatomic templates. Then this is something I bring up because if you're getting started and if you want to move into a space that you're going to have a huge impact, I think it's a craniomaxillofacial space. A great starting point is mandible trauma. So we will take mandible models, make the virtual model, and then we will virtually reduce the fractures that are present in the mandible model, 3D print that, and then the fixation plates they use can be pre-bent up against that mandible, and that plate can then be cleaned and sterilized, central sterile, and implanted. So this is a relatively low risk, very high impact application for 3D printing that I think, in addition to ortho, is a great place to start. IR is a great place to start. I'm biased. But craniomaxillofacial is another area to start where your docs will likely already have seen this out in the wild or seen this at institutions they've been at previously and clamor for this. About 1/3 of what we do is craniomaxillofacial, 1/3 is ortho, and 1/3 is a kind of a hodgepodge of vascular surgery, cardiology, urology, IR, and the rest. Now, we are creating medical devices, and so workflow tracking is really, really important. When I started the process, obviously we had no money, no softwares, and really nothing existed to do what we wanted to do in terms of tracking. Every single model should be tracked, and you should be able to track it from start to finish. And I started with a piece of software as a service called Airtable. It's free to use, and you can create whatever tables, and it's basically like a nice front end for a database. And you can create your inventory management, your new model intake, tracking through the manufacturing process. You can make things look however you want. And it's a great place to start until you grow large enough to explore more sophisticated solutions. Our solution here has been developed in-house and is patent pending and gives us full traceability from model request all the way through to model delivery, and it is technology agnostic. So we can track cartridges for SLA. We can track nylon containers for MJF printing. We track the lot numbers of the isopropyl alcohol used to clean all of our models. We track how much volume has gone through our wash stations and how often. That lets us see how often we need to exchange the IPA, for example. And so really we've developed a software that lets us do full traceability start to finish. And that really is important, being able to maintain that quality and ensure that the right model is delivered for the right patient, and that there are any challenges along the way or any issues that crop up, you can figure out where they came from. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the COVID-19 era. Like many hospitals, we had shortages in COVID testing swabs. And so in about a 3-week period, we were able to design, develop, benchtop test, and begin large-scale manufacturing of a 3D printed nasopharyngeal swab. And we actually registered with the FDA as a medical device manufacturer, converted an OR into a manufacturing facility, took displaced UPMC staff, trained them on our process. And when all was said and done, we produced 62,000 swabs that were used on patients across 20 testing sites, and most importantly, with 0 adverse events from use of those swabs. So that's essentially, I think, what helped catapult us kind of to the next level and kind of put us on a higher tier with the system, being able to provide services like this. And it helps create a lot of interest in, hey, we can create anatomic models, surgical tools, but when things break around the hospital or there are supply chain shortages, we can step in, reverse engineer things, and help fill some gaps. An example of that is the head cradles used in MRI by Gamma Knife. There was a shortage. The cradle they had broke. The company that made it didn't exist anymore as a result of COVID. And so what we did is we reverse engineered the original cradle, which you can see here on the right. And the original cradle, for some reason, had this giant clunky mechanism here for adjusting the height. We replaced that with a simple hinge and produced a small number of these. And these are used every day in Gamma Knife. It has saved thousands of dollars and months of delays potentially. Now, for the longest time, there was this myth running out there that to get started with 3D printing, you needed a $150,000 printer, you needed to spend thousands or hundreds of dollars in raw material per model, and you had to use expensive $10,000, $15,000 a year software, and that was the only way to do things. I think we've shown that that's not true. If you take a look at the model on the right, if you ask people maybe 5 years ago, what technology would you use to create this model? Most people would say, oh, I would use PolyJet, I would maybe use MJF, big, expensive, 6-figure cost printers. This was actually made on a Form 2 back in the day, $3,500 printer for about $20 of raw material. And that really, the reality is that you can start a lab for, in the way, this is how I pitched it to radiology. I said, for less than the cost of one diagnostic monitor, you can buy everything you need from a hardware and consumable standpoint to print a couple hundred models. And these models will be high quality. It won't necessarily be low quality, low res models. They're very high quality, and the raw material cost per part is very, very cheap, relatively speaking. I mean, as little as $10, $15 a model. I think our most expensive model in our first year was maybe $100 of raw material. And this can all be done when you're getting started with free software. Now, a quick disclaimer. If you were to 3D print a model that was going to be used for preoperative planning or a surgical tool or plate bending, it is technically being used for diagnostic type purposes and would be a Class 2 medical device. If you were trying to sell or market that model, you would fall under Part 820 of Title 21, which is the FDA. And you'd be required to get a 510K. Now, the FDA does not regulate the practice of medicine. They regulate the marketing and sale of medical devices. And so if you are manufacturing at the point of care under the supervision of a physician, then creating these models falls under practice of medicine. So every single model we create doesn't fall under the FDA for now because it falls under literally my license to practice medicine. And so one, that gives you flexibility, but creates an enormous responsibility on your part to ensure that you're producing accurate, consistent, safe, and effective models. Now, getting started, because it is practice of medicine, I feel that you can start with freeware as long as your focus is low risk models and low volume. But before you start, there really should be discussions with the local kind of stakeholders within your hospital systems. Here, that included starting with risk management, corporate legal, our CMO, saying, hey, here's what we want to do. Here are the risks, here are the benefits, laying it all out there, and laying out the processes you have in place to ensure that you're producing safe and effective models. That documentation essentially though we are not regulated by the FDA, we act like we are. So we've developed a quality management system. We have a document control system that's Part 11 compliant that we've developed in-house. And we have documentation of everything we do, why we do it, how we ensure safety and efficacy in everything that we create. And if you come to your legal leadership with something like that in hand, I think you're going to find that they're going to be very open to getting started. As you start looking at creating models that are sterilized, you definitely have to work closely with your regulatory groups and your sterile processing departments to make sure you provide everything they need to kind of put them at ease. And you can, in just a few short years, really kind of be doing everything across the board. A little bit on printer selection. When people think about cheap 3D printing, everyone kind of thinks FDM. FDM is likely what you've seen in schools and libraries of 3D printing. It melts plastic filament and lays it down one layer at a time. While that can be low cost, and they do make printers that can create soluble supports for ease of post-processing, really SLA is something that lets you be a lot more versatile and gives you the reliability and speed that you need to produce at the point of care while still letting you create high resolution models. And so, I think SLA really is a place to start. Now, I have no financial ties to any company, but I am a big fan of the Formlabs line of printers. They are relatively affordable, very reliable. You can beat the crap out of these printers, and they do very, very well. And they can produce very, very high resolution models. But SLA does have a couple of big limitations, and I think the two biggest ones are size and color. And I'll talk a little bit about how to kind of overcome those challenges. With SLA printing, you can only print in one material at a time. For larger models, though, print and assemble is really the key. You can take any size model of human anatomy, cut it into pieces, and print the pieces one at a time, and then assemble afterwards with some glue. And you can create, here's a large spine model I made in my first year with a Form 2, split it in two, and then had pegs and holes and glued things together, and it worked out just fine. Now, the color model is a little bit trickier. Believe it or not, all of these were made on a Form 2 about 8 years ago, and using what we pioneered as a print and fill technique. Basically, if anywhere you want to add color, model it as a hollow cavity. So here's a hollow tube for the ulnar nerve. Here's a hollow tube structure for this tumor or for this renal cell carcinoma. And then you can create little holes in those cavities and fill those cavities with acrylic paint. Literally put acrylic paint in a syringe, inject it into that space, dab the outside with a little resin and cure with a UV pen, and you've created a multicolor model for pennies on the dollar, what it would take on, say, polyjet technology. And now all of a sudden, with this combination of a relatively low cost but high quality and high reliability printer and a can of paint, you can make some pretty impressive models that'll create a lot of value. Some examples here. These surgical guides cost about $12 of raw material. This transposition of the great arteries model, again, made on SLA. This one was hand painted, about 15 bucks. And that gluteal vein model I mentioned, under $50, but it lets you create very high quality models. Here's an adrenal mass model we ablated, and again, injected with paint. And injecting with paint for these cavities makes it a lot more practical and a lot faster than trying to paint by hand. Now, how do you do this with freeware software? There's really two key steps in the manufacturing process. The first is segmentation. This is actually the process of converting a physical model into, or a CT scan, usually a CT scan, into a virtual model. And then the CAD, or computer-aided step, is a process by which you modify that model, get the model ready for printing. And I'll talk a little bit about both. 3D Slicer, slicer.org, is a piece of freeware that most of us had used for our freeware segmentation. It's a powerful image analysis suite. It lets you do all kinds of stuff. But the segmentation suite, when I started was pretty bare bones, but now it's pretty robust and can do almost everything the high-end software can do. MeshMixer is actually technically a discontinued piece of software, but is still available by Autodesk for free. And I think it hits that sweet spot between simplicity of use and ease of use, but still having a lot of features that you need that let you do pretty much everything you need to do to create models. And at this point, we'll kind of switch gears here. I'll kind of show you what that looks like in real life. So this is a CT scan that we've loaded up in Slicer. This is a patient who has a splenic artery aneurysm, and you can see that aneurysm right here. And the segmentation that we're going to show today really relies on the fact that contrast is a lot denser than the surrounding tissue. And so within Slicer, you can actually go to their segment editor, is what the suite is called. And here's where you can create your different segmentations. And so we're going to add a segmentation. And the default color for this initial segmentation is this little bright green. And this tool right here, this kind of gradient bar to a blocky bar, is the what's called thresholding tool. When you turn it on, you're going to see it start flashing, and it'll default to something that's on the higher density. So this bar down here kind of shows you the range of voxel Hounsfield units that you're going to include in your model. If I drag this down and include something like -100, I'll get more air or soft tissue. But as I drag this up to density of soft tissue, you start to get only soft tissue. You can see fat we're not including now. But we want contrast. I'm going to drag this up, and I'm eyeballing here. And to make sure we get most of the contrast pool here, and we're not including things like the kidneys and the liver and the spleen and the liver that we don't want to include. Now we are getting bone here. You can try to drop the upper bound a little bit, but you do run into issues. So you want to find a nice little sweet spot where you get all of the contrast and as little of the bone as possible. Now this should point out to you, I think, the value of radiology in this line of work, which is, we've all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have high quality scans with thin slices, 0.625 ideally, or 0.5, whatever your scanners can do that's thin, certainly no thicker than 1 millimeter. But you want to make sure your contrast timing is optimal. And a lot of diagnostic protocols won't necessarily include thin slices by default, won't include the different contrast timing that you need. And so as you grow and develop your kind of regular customers, as it were, you may find yourself working with your techs to create customized protocols for scanning. For example, for RCC, we actually have added an arterial phase to the typical renal mass protocol so that we can do easy segmentation of the arteries for the urologists and the IR docs of ablation. But here we've kind of grabbed the voxels we want. We're going to hit this apply button. And now you can see here that we've started creating our mask here that includes the vessels here. If you hit the show 3D button, you give it a little bit of time here, and you're going to see a virtual version of that. Obviously, you can see we've grabbed a lot of other stuff that we don't want, and we can use some of the tools here. Within Slicer is this islands tool. If you click on the islands tool and then click on the keep selected island tool, and then you grab your aorta, it'll get rid of everything that's not connected to that aorta. And you may have to play with the thresholding a bit so you don't get the spine, but we've done a pretty good job here. And we've grabbed only the vessels, and this looks pretty good. Now, we're not done here. There's a lot more than just thresholding, hitting apply, and hitting print. This is where the radiology side comes in. You actually want to scroll through your images and make sure that you are including only what you want to include. And partial volume averaging is the enemy here. So you want to make sure that things aren't connected that shouldn't be, things aren't included that shouldn't be. And there are some of these gaps you can kind of see if you look, especially right here. There are a set of tools. This smoothing tool here, it has a smoothing method called closing. And what closing does is it basically tries to fill holes within the model. And it does this by expanding the model out a number of voxels and then shrinking it back in. And so I like 3 millimeters. I hit the apply button. You can see it filled in a lot of those gaps, and the model looks a lot cleaner here. Now, this is not an actual model. What this is this is a representation of all the voxels that are included. And to create an actual model, you want to click the Go to Segmentations module, this green arrow right here. And then you want to scroll down to the Representations section. And you want to hit for closed surface, which is what we're looking to create. You want to hit this Update button. And it pops up the advanced segmentation image conversion process. And this is where you're turning your segmentation, which is essentially a pile of voxels, into a 3D surface. Now, the most important thing is this will default to a very high smoothing factor. You want to drop this to no more than 0.2. Too much smoothing will warp your model. It'll make small structures even smaller. It can eliminate key aspects, so you want to be really careful with smoothing. Decimation is a process where you want to reduce the number of triangles in your surface mesh. A little bit of that can be a good thing, so that your models aren't overly complicated for no reason. So we're going to hit our convert button. and it's going to turn this into a physical model, an STL file. And then down here in the export to file section, you can browse to the path you want to export, and then hit the export button, and it'll create your STL file. Now, you have two options here. You can export this raw thing here and work with that in your 3D model, your CAD software, or you can do, I spent a little bit more time earlier and trimmed away more that we didn't need and had a much cleaner looking model. There really isn't a right answer. It's whatever you're most comfortable working in. If you like trimming and cleaning up in here, you can do that. If you prefer doing that in something like MeshMixer, that's fine. So we're going to go over to MeshMixer. We're going to pull in the file we just created. And MeshMixer here is a nice piece of CAD software. And one thing you'll notice when you load this in is it's got this funny pink appearance. A funny quirk of Slicer is that by default, it seems to export models that are inside out. So STL files are actually infinitely thin boundaries that define the boundary between the inside of the model and kind of the rest of the world. And so they do have a sidedness to it. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is use this select tool, double click to grab your surface here. And then under the edit option, you want to flip your normals. And you'll know you've done that correctly when the model has this nice gray appearance. Now, the first thing we want to do is get rid of the structures we don't need. So we're going to go to our edit tool. We're going to use this plane cut tool. And this is a really nice tool that lets you cut the model. And by default, it pops up in the true axial plane of the imaging that you did, of the scan you performed. And these tools let you flip the side you're cutting. And so what you want to do is, I always include at least one surface in every model that is cut to the true axial plane as a reference point. So whoever's looking at the model can get a sense of, okay, this is anterior, this is posterior, medial, lateral, superior, inferior. We're going to make that same plane cut from below and get rid of a lot of what we don't. And then you want to make sure you don't cut into the splenic artery here. And so something like that can be a nice little cut here. And we've got a decent looking start here. Now, for vascular models, one of the things I really like doing is actually providing a hollow model that you can kind of get a sense of what the inner lumen looks like. And so the way we do that, notice I haven't done any smoothing, but we're going to grab the model we created by double clicking, and you see it's grabbed our surface here. And we're going to use under edit this offset tool. And what that does is it takes your surface and offsets it by a fixed amount, and then you can connect those two surfaces together, and it creates a hollow model that actually has some wall thickness. I like 1.25 for my default. I find that's a sweet spot between creating models that are optically transparent, but not so thin that the models are structurally weak on SLA resins. You want to make sure that your parts are connected so that the two shells become one part. And let it do its thing. And once we hit apply, we now have our hollowed model. And so now the thing is, it's all sealed up. So you're going to want to use the cut tool to now open that up. And so back to your plane cut tool. And if you look inside, I'm going to flip this around. You can see we're actually cutting the model open. And you can see inside. And so you want to rinse and repeat that process down below. Now, one of the neat things about Slicer is I can use the select, or MeshMixers, I can use the select tool. I can grab just this part here. And then when I go to my edit plane cut tool, now when I plane cut, it's only going to cut what I've highlighted. It's not going to cut the rest of this out here. The other nice thing about that plane cut tool is you can actually draw planes. So I can sit here and say, I want to cut this I want to cut a plane here. And you'll be able to cut something there, so you can kind of see just that part of the hollow cavity here. Now, one of the things I like to do for these models as well, once I've cut everything open, you can use your select tool, double click on the outside to grab just the outer surface. And then under deform, there's this smoothing option. And you can smooth just the outside. Now here you can be very aggressive with smoothing because you've grabbed only the outer surface, you're not going to warp the size of your vessel structures. And we're going to repeat the same thing for the inside. So I'm going to grab the inside only. And then again, I'm going to deform and smooth. And so now I've got a very, very smooth model inside and out that'll be much more optically clear. Now we can go to File and Export. And I'm going to navigate to the folder I want to work in. And I like the binary STL format. Binary is a nice, and it's a much more compressed file format than ASCII. And you want to give this a name. Now, we've got our physical model ready. This can then be printed, but before you do that, you have to make sure that you haven't done anything weird in any of your processes to modify things in an incorrect fashion. One more thing I'll touch on also is there's this analysis tab where you can go to this inspector, and it will look for defects in your mesh. Now this mesh looks like it's watertight, doesn't have any defects, but it did find this one little floating bit of mesh out here. So if we hit auto repair all, it'll get rid of that, and we're good to go. We're going to go back to Slicer, and I'm going to drag and drop the file I just made onto Slicer. And it's going to bring that in. And what you can do here is go to the file you just brought in and hit this clipping option. And what that should do here is create, should be the operative word here. We go slice display. On the slice display, you're going to hit this visibility option, and it'll turn on the contours of the mesh you just brought in onto your surface. And so you can now scroll through. You can see our hollow walls here and make sure that the model is accurate. And this is a key aspect of why 3D printing should sit in radiology. Every single clinical model we make, once the segmentation is done by our engineers, a board certified radiologist sits down, usually a subspecialty trained radiologist, ENT, body imaging, breast imaging, MSK, and sits down and goes through the segmentation and ensures that everything is accurate, that we haven't excluded anything we don't want to exclude, we haven't included anything we don't want to include. And this quality control is a key aspect of things. If you find yourself in a hospital where surgery wants us to sit under surgery, just mention this aspect. Don't you want a board certified radiologist making sure the models are accurate? Don't you want to make sure an artery isn't accidentally called a vein? Or don't you want to make sure that the margins of the tumor are accurately represented? The day that doesn't happen is the day that these models go from being helpful to potentially being harmful. And once this is done, you're ready to go with 3D printing. And so whatever slicing software you use with your printer, most printers come with free slicing software, Preform, Cura, whatever you're going to use. This can then be loaded up and used for printing. So jumping back, I know I quickly ran through this, but obviously a recording will be available afterwards that you can go through again to kind of capture that process and follow along. YouTube is full of tutorials of what I just showed you. So Google and YouTube are your best friends. It's how I learned that, plus some tinkering and playing with things. And pretty much everything you would want to know and be able to do, you can find tutorials out there. So I hope I've shown today that you can start with 3D printing with really very few resources and create very low cost models. And Freeware is a great place to kind of get your foot in the door and get started. As your programs grow and you start creating more and more models and get into higher risk applications, getting funding for 510K cleared software, I think, though, is a must. And with that said, I want to thank everybody for their time and attention today. Please check out our website, upmc.com/3D printing. Since I do have radiology trainees here, I'll use the ability to say we are recruiting in every division. And we're always looking for physicians who are interested in getting involved in 3D printing, help with physician reviews, help with research projects, and be happy to have anyone come aboard. With that, thank you guys very much, and we'll turn it over to the Q&A section.
This was really fantastic. Thank you so much, Anish. If anyone has questions, please drop them in the chat, or I'm not sure if you can come off mute and ask. One quick question as we're starting. How long did it take you to really get proficient at this software? Like, how long should people think about practicing and working through it before they're ready to go?
Oh, great question. I mean, this is definitely, it was a labor of love getting started. I would say it, at the beginning, it was coming in early, staying late, working nights, working weekends, and just tinkering. I mean, it probably took me a couple dozen models before I started to get fast at this. I mean, the first time I tried to segment something, it took me hours and hours. Whenever we bring on new residents who rotate through with us or bring on new engineers, I mean, they'll spend, a couple hours on one model. But as you do this more and more, then you just get faster and faster and faster at it. Now, I can segment the most orthopedic models in 5 minutes or less. More complex models still take time, but it's all about just getting your hands on different scans and just practicing until you kind of get it down kind of road. Looks like someone asked about using automatic segmentation. There are a wide variety of tools out there that use AI to try to automate segmentation, and we do use a little bit. We've got some in-house developed AI tools for segmenting pulmonary arteries, pulmonary veins, and so definitely they're worth exploring. But relying on those adds a step, I think, for sure, of making sure you take that segmentation, bring it into your whatever software you're using, and ensuring that the segmentation is accurate and making any modifications you need to make sure you have those accurate models. Let's see, outside of this recording, have you created a guide with these directions on Slicer and MeshWorks to be able to play around with developing models? So MeshMixer or Slicer, 3D Slicer does have an add-on module for craniomaxillofacial reconstruction. And you can absolutely create surgical guides using that and MeshMixer. I think I would be a bit hesitant to create surgical guides if you're in the US without 510K cleared software, because once you're starting to create surgical guides that touch the inside of a patient, you are kind of getting closer and closer to traditional medical device territory. And I think you're going to find that your hospital systems are going to want you to use FDA cleared software. But for experimenting, for proof of concept, for animal work, I think using those freeware tools is perfectly okay. People are welcome to contact us from anywhere. Yeah, always happy to chat with anybody, hop on a Teams call and get into some specifics. Let's see here. I was wondering if you've seen any use for modeling cranioplasty. And so, yeah, I mean, we pretty much every application, every surgical service, cranioplasty, arthroplasty, craniomaxillofacial reconstruction is a big part of what we do. About a third of what we do is craniomaxillofacial reconstruction from trauma. We do a lot with children's as well, for congenital work. And so the sky's the limit, really. If the real answer to this is if you have a surgeon who thinks it's going to be helpful, that's really all you need. And we're pretty open with if a surgeon comes to us with a crazy idea and says, I think this is going to be helpful. Give it a shot, print a model and see how it works. I think the most important thing, though, is once you get a surgeon on board, you want to print the model for an actual case they have coming up. Showing them a model, a generic 3D printed model, really isn't going to get them excited. But if you say, no, this guy you're operating on tomorrow, this is his hip, his shoulder, her kidney, then all of a sudden they're going to be a lot more interested. They're going to do the case. They're going to have that model. And then they'll be hooked. And I mean, it consisted of me, the first renal cell carcinoma model I created. I was literally in the OR, and the surgeon kept going back to look at the CT scan, and I kept having to remind him, no, here's a model, look at the model. You almost have to hold their hand and show them the model and kind of force them to use it a little bit to break them out of their old habits. And once they actually look at it and use it on an actual patient, they'll never go back. Next question here is, how do clinicians order models and our turnaround time? So for us, when we started, it was kind of word of mouth. I had surgeons texting me, emailing me, calling me. We still do have a fair bit of more informal ordering through people sending texts and emails, and especially for stat models. But now with the latest version of our software, we're on 5.1, I believe. We are integrated with Epic and Cerner, so when orders are placed, it'll actually automatically create a request in our request queue. Or when we push images from our PACS to our DICOM server, it'll automatically create those requests. We tell people for non-stat models, we like about a week for turnaround time, just to give us some breathing room. But we have turned things around in as little as 45 minutes, especially with the new Form 4 printer, which prints insanely fast. We printed a left atrial model in 30 minutes. And so they literally said, hey, this patient's getting on the table in 20 minutes. Can you help us? And we were able to bang out the segmentation, the model in about 45 minutes total, and got the model to them right before they started. We don't love doing that, but for trauma, it's going to be very valuable. Question here is, am I more research-based or printing models? So I would say about 80 to 90% of what we do is clinical 3D printing. So our mission and our work is largely clinical. So creating actual clinical models for preoperative planning, creating actual surgical tools that are used on actual patients. We do some research and education models just to kind of help advance the mission of the system. But I'll let Beth chime in as well.
Oh no, I'm just clearing the queue for you.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Someone wants MeshMixer for training. They said they found a paid course to be very helpful. It's only $79. That sounds wonderful. I would have loved to have something like that when I started, and as opposed to feeling my way through the dark. Next question here is, can 3D software be used for brain lesions such as infarcts and bleeds? Absolutely. I mean, what I tell surgeons and interventional colleagues is, if I can see it on a CT scan and draw a line around it, you can print it. The limiting factor really is the CT scan. These printers, a Formlabs printer, average resolution or average layer height is 0.1 millimeters, although you can go down to 0.025 millimeters. Your thin slice CTs, 10 times that, 5 times that. And so the limiting factor, and really what you create, is what can you see on CT. Next question here. Now that you have PolyJet, do you still manually add color to SLA parts? How do you decide what to print given a model? So when I first started, everything was SLA. We added color manually. The next big printing technology we onboarded was MJF, the HP Multijet Fusion printer. And so if we need full color, we go to the MJF, because the MJF creates these really robust nylon parts and adds really, really nice color. To be honest, the problem with PolyJet is it's very expensive. A small congenital heart with the educational discount on the raw material costs about $300 of raw material. On a Formlabs, it's about $20, $25. And so I use PolyJet kind of begrudgingly and only when I have no other choice. And really, I think we just got the J5 a couple months ago. My target use for that is going to be the biomimetic printing, the digital anatomy printing that they have coming out for the J5 within the next year. And so the cost, I think, for PolyJet really just makes it not practical for day-to-day low-cost models, especially if you're limited on your budget. Next question here. My team investigated radiological properties for FDM and SLA materials that we can use to represent tissue. Do you have any tips? To be honest, this is something we have not explored. There's a lot of interest in creating phantoms and creating phantoms that you can CT, you can fluoro, you can ultrasound. What we have found, honestly, is the SLA resins. If you put them in plastic, and you collimate well, you can see them pretty well in fluoroscopy for training. And the flexible materials from something like SLA do ultrasound reasonably well. They're a little bit more reflective than regular tissue. But I do know that on the PolyJet machines, they do have a whole line of materials that are targeted around radiopacity. That is not something we've explored a lot of. I'm sorry, I'm moving quickly here. I'm just trying to get through everything before we run out of time. Do you think any radiomics and associated software has a role in this field? Radiomics, I think, has an application, almost indirect. One of the things that we found is one of the challenges with AI research and radiomics research is you need high quality segmented images to put through radiomics, especially for things like tumors. Well, in order to create 3D printed models, you're creating high quality segmentations for that purpose. And so we've gone back and said, hey, we've made a couple hundred kidney models. Let's go back and pull those segmentations, and now we can do radiomics on that because we already have the segmentation, and we can pull that data much more easily. So I would definitely think about being able to kind of use those segmentations for more than one application. I think I skipped a question here about using high resolution MR. We do. We create a lot of models for our children's hospital for brain tumors. And we use, somebody was talking about automated segmentation. So we use FreeSurfer with FSL to automate a lot of the brain segmentation. We'll then pull that into, and we use thin slice T1 images to do that segmentation, pull that into Mimics, and then make any corrections and print. So MRI is challenging, but if you have a high resolution sequence, 1 millimeter slices you can definitely use that. But you want to kind of counsel your surgeons. A lot of the MRI sequences are things like 5 mm thick slices with 5 mm spacing. So if you can create something off of that and it'll look terrible, you can use a lot of aggressive smoothing to make it look better. But the accuracy, if your thinnest slice is 5 mm, you have to double that for your error rate. So you could be off by a centimeter or something. So you really want to be careful with those thicker slices. Last question here. When using printed models to train or practice procedures, are they still considered medical devices to be classified as educational tools? So if you're using a model strictly for training, I create a model of vascular cardiac aneurysm and residents and trainees are just practicing on the model. No problem. Educational, can use freeware, really very few restrictions. If you are printing a model of an actual case and you are intending to practice on that model and it modifies your plan in any way, shape, or form, most people at the FDA will say that that counts as a class 2 medical device. It has a diagnostic purpose. And that is what the 510(k) labeling is for diagnostic use. And diagnostic use is anything where you're going to look at something and make a medical decision off of it. I'm going to cut here, I'm going to cut there. I'm going to use this size stent or that size coil. I'm going to use this catheter or that catheter. Those all technically would be class 2. Now, again, the FDA is not going to come knocking on your door for now saying, hey, at the hospital, you need 510(k) or any of that. But to get your risk management and legal and QI safety folks on board, they're going to ask about that. And you're going to have to say, well, we're not regulated by the FDA, but if there's a bad outcome, people are going to ask. Even if there's a lawsuit that has nothing to do with the model you made, but the patient develops an infection or has a fall and there's a lawsuit, well, in that discovery process, the lawyers may say, hey, you guys use 3D printing, and what's your process? How do you know that these models are safe and effective and they're medical devices? And you want to be able to answer those questions and be able to say, no, we have this process that is as robust as Part 820. Here's all the documentation of what we do and why we do it. And if I had one piece of advice from that standpoint is, as long as you document what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, that you've thought about risk and you've implemented these things to minimize risk, that'll appease a lot of legal folks. And that can give you what you need if there were ever, God forbid, any sort of issue. You can have something to lean on from an accuracy, safety, and efficacy standpoint. Next question here. Would you consider creating a synthetic high resolution MRI using FreeSurfer tools from low resolution MRI? It's not something I've experimented with. It's something we would explore, but it would depend on the application and it would depend on the image quality. If you can pull that back into, take your final STL, put it on the original raw MRI and ensure that things are as accurate as possible. And if you can find, if your radiologist who heads your program says, yes, I approve this model and it's documented and they're taking on that risk, that practice of medicine risk, saying this is accurate, then I think that would be okay. But that you have to do your due diligence and have a process and documentation of that process saying, well, we trust this is safe. And working with your surgeon and saying that, hey, these are the limitations. A real world example of that is we get a lot of model requests for revision total shoulder arthroplasty where they have a lot of hardware. There's a lot of beam hardening artifact. And I mean, truly, you were kind of guessing where some bone is and bone isn't. And with every model that we feel that there is a limitation, we include a physical card in the delivery box that says, hey, disclaimer, this model may have huge inaccuracies because of the beam hardening, pay attention to these areas. And as long as everybody's on the same page and you've got that process, I think you're as covered as you can be. Does your documentation system also cover the business side of your 3D lab, cost and OR time estimate savings? So indirectly, yes. I mean, we started, we created a business plan that said, hey, we're going to create these models. The literature says for craniomaxillofacial reconstruction, the average model saves about 45 minutes. And a minute of OR costs about this much. That can usually be enough to kind of get your foot in the door and get a little bit of funding. Now, if the bean counters are pretty strict, they may come back and tell you, you know what, saving 45 minutes of OR time doesn't really help the hospital because it's not like we can add on an extra case for 45 minutes and make more money. But if you go to your surgeons and say, hey, I'm going to shave an hour off your surgical time and you tell anesthesia, hey, you'll be an hour less of anesthesia, then all of a sudden, okay, it starts becoming a patient safety issue, and hospitals are more likely to kind of get behind it. And so what we did is, after we kind of got started, we got that little bit of funding to get started. We then created a handful of models and got our surgeons on board. And then we were able to take those models. So we focused on hips, craniomaxillofacial, brain, and the temporal bone. And we actually got quotes from different companies that make these models clinically, and then presented to our leadership, hey, here is the cost of outsourcing this, and here is the cost of us doing it in-house. And we avoid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by insourcing all of this. Now, you have to be careful in that you're only using models that surgeons will be willing to fight to outsource, right? You can't just print anything and everything and say you're saving millions of dollars. We focus on only applications that we know that if we did not do them would be significant hindrance to things. We make that argument to finance, and that's kind of what gets us, gets our foot in the door and gets us the budget that we do get. And that's how we justified the funding for our clean room, saying, hey, we are outsourcing surgical guides and reconstruction, virtual surgical planning. It costs this much. We're going to insource it. It only costs us this much, and we're going to save this much money. So the new space will pay for itself in a couple of years. And that's kind of the argument that you're making. Implants, great question. So everyone agrees that implants really do fall under the FDA. Even if you're manufacturing at the point of care, I think most people are going to say you need a 510K. So our step one for us was building those 3 ISO 7 clean rooms. We've got 1 clean room that we're going to hopefully house a 3D printer that will let us print an implant grade PEEK. And our plan, once we get the funding for that, is to sit down with the company, actually craft the 510K, and submit to the FDA. Now, we've built that framework. Here at UPMC, we do have a full-fledged quality management system. We have everything from user needs, design controls, design verification validation, process verification validation. We do installation qualification, operational qualification, and process qualification, IQ, OQ, PQ, they're called, for all of our hardware. We have these processes in place, just like any medical device manufacturer would have. It's a lot at first, but you just kind of take things one piece at a time, and over time you can build out your full-fledged QMS, and that will kind of set you up for success as you move to implants.
This was amazing, Anish. Thank you, Dr. Ghodadra. Not only amazing presentation, but like jammed through 17 questions. And so I think truly amazing, great engagement, great topic. Thank you to everyone who attended. If you like these focuses on trainees and some of this stuff, let us know. Think about joining the 3D SIG if you're not already a member. And then I think finally, just remember, this is a great community. Anish has been so fantastic here to share out his knowledge and learning. And as he said, I'm sure he's happy to answer questions, as are any of us. And go have a great day, everyone. And thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.